Welcome back to Pixel Project Radio, the video game discussions podcast where we do deep dives and analyze all of our favorite games, and some of yours too. My name is Rick, and today we are discussing the Talos Principle, a unique puzzle game examining the fundamentals of consciousness, free will, and transhumanism beset by religious illusion. Anybody that knows me will probably not be surprised to hear that I am stoked to talk about this episode. But before we do, we got to thank the patrons. The patrons are a collective of very kind folks that believe in the show and have joined the Patreon, and they are just the best. They're just the greatest. And I want to thank them, as I always do up top, because without them, well, I wouldn't be able to do this as often as I do. So thank you, major thank you to the patrons. If you want to be like them, you can check out the link in the description that says patreon.com/pixelprojectradio. We can talk all about that stuff a little bit later on, because first I want to introduce a guest that is joining me, reintroduce the guest because this is not his first time here. He is one half of the dynamic duo of Lo-Fi Gaming, one of my personal favorite podcasts. We've got Alex. Hey Alex, thanks for joining me, man.
Rick, you're too kind. It's great to be back, man. I'm excited to jump into this talk, and I know you want to save it for later in the episode, but I'm going to hawk your Patreon again and say if you're not Patreonizing Rick, you're not doing it right. So you have all of your episodes are fantastic, dude, but I love your Patreon episodes because you have the tendency to get a little weird on there, and I think it's a lot of fun.
I appreciate that, man. You were actually the one person that was reassuring me the most whenever I was feeling like those were a waste of time. You were like, no, man, like that's really great. So I really appreciate you, man. I do. First of all, I want to welcome all the new listeners. If you're a new listener to the show, first of all, welcome. The way that we do things here is we take one game and we analyze it from top to bottom. No spoilers, though, until we start talking about the narrative. Now, with the Talos Principle, this is a little bit different because the narrative is a bit lighter. We'll still hold off on talking story until we get to the very end, but the meat on the bone of the Talos Principle, and even the marrow within the bone, is in the grand ideas, the thematic motifs that are within, and we will be talking about those almost immediately, which is fine, because, even if you know all about this, I think you'd still enjoy the game. The Talos Principle, as we alluded to a few moments ago, is a puzzle game in which players take the role of a sentient AI robot thing, solving puzzles at the behest of a mysterious booming voice that calls itself Elohim. This world was created for us, it tells us, calls us its child, and tells us to the tower we must not go. We must solve his puzzles, his riddles 3 or 300 or so, but never to the tower must we go. It's a very cool game. Before we start, though, I wanted to do a little teaser, a little thought experiment with you, Alex, if you're game.
I'm game, dude.
So you've heard of the Ship of Theseus, right?
No.
Oh, okay. So the Ship of Theseus is a thought experiment where you have a ship. Theseus has a ship, I should say. And the gist of it is if you replace the ship's parts one by one over a long enough time frame, at what point does it stop being the ship that you used to know and become a new thing entirely? Makes sense?
Right.
At what point when you're replacing every single part of something does it turn into something else?
Right. Okay.
Now I want to flip that onto people for a second. So let's say hypothetically, tomorrow you wake up and you see me and I've been in an accident. And I've had to have all 4 limbs, my left arm, left leg, right leg, all 4 of them, replaced by a robot. By robot limbs, excuse me, not by 4 individual robots. Not like a Megazord just yet. Maybe in time. But if I had 4 robotic limbs, I think it's not a stretch to say that you would still consider me conscious, right?
Sure.
Okay. Let's push this a step further. What if that accident took away my entire body and I was just a head, a brain, and then a robotic body? Full robotic body, just a head. Surely that's still conscious, right?
I would argue that's the case. You and Darth Vader.
Of course. Famously conscious villain Darth Vader. Now, here's where it gets interesting. What if the accident rendered my entire physical organism, everything except my brain, unusable, and I had to be turned into a robot, but I still had my brain. Or we could even go a step further and say that my brain was destroyed, but everything in my brain, my color preferences, my ideologies, my religious beliefs, favorite foods, personality tics, the way I scratch my rear end in the morning, everything was translated and uploaded into a robot that looked exactly like me, but was completely mechanical. Would I be conscious?
Yeah, that's where it starts getting tricky, doesn't it? That one I'm not sure of, to be completely honest. I would argue no. I would argue that you're no longer Rick.
And therein lies the beauty of the Talos principle, because it's that we're going to be exploring today. Now, not just that, this game also explores free will, which we'll talk about, and it's also a very heavy allegory. Well, no, allegory is not the right word. It's a retelling of the Garden of Eden of sorts. So we'll talk about that as well. But this episode is going to be all about the grand narrative, the grand ideas, the thematic motifs, everything. And I'm just so excited to talk about it. Alex, you and I were talking off mic. I think this episode might have the most external sources cited out of any episode I've ever done.
Yeah, totally, man. I think it's, we had a chance to talk a little bit earlier too, and this is a game that, yeah, it's a good game. And like overall, like as far as video games go, it's a great puzzler. But I don't think any other video game has like basically put me in a position where I started questioning human consciousness and like the meaning of life, etc. And I think for that reason alone, like this has been a great play.
I'm really happy you think so, man, because I agree in spades. I've been talking long enough, and you kind of are dancing up next to this next section. So I'm going to pass the mic to you. I want to hear about your personal history with this game. When did you first discover it? Do you have any overall thoughts that you would like to share or add on to what you just said? Tell us a little bit about your history with the Talos principle.
Yeah, I actually, so this is my first playthrough. I've heard rumblings of this game. It's one that seems to come up in, best games of all times or like must plays lists. But I hadn't played it yet. I'm also a fan of Devolver Digital. I think they're a publishing house that puts out a lot of great video game content. So because of that alone, I think I've probably seen the title floating around there. But again, it's a game that, when you're out there searching, it just comes up in those, what are some must plays. Interestingly enough, I don't really know a lot of folks that have played this game personally. So it's kind of funny that it keeps showing up on those lists, yet I don't really know a bunch of people that have played it. But I was excited when you reached out to ask about it, because it was one that I had in the backlog and I had wanted to play because I had seen, good rumblings about it. Interestingly, when I first started playing, I bounced off of it super quickly because it made me physically ill. The game is not great for motion sickness. That said, they do have an entire section in the settings to help fix that. So once I tweaked those a little bit, I was able to jump in, and then it really did get its hooks into me, and I thoroughly enjoyed my playthrough. But a little caveat for folks that may be interested after listening or during listening to play this themselves, check out those motion sickness settings.
Yeah. You're not the first person that I've heard mention that. I've seen many a thread on Reddit and on the internet talking about the motion sickness specifically. And, when we talk about the visuals or the mechanics, maybe we could circle back to that. I didn't fiddle with those settings quite as much, but I would be very interested to hear more about that.
Yeah, and to be fair, I mean, I also had some motion sickness problems when I play games like Half-Life was rough for me. This one, I think they had, because this one came out quite a bit after Half-Life and Half-Life 2, maybe closer to Half-Life 2, but I feel like it's of that era. There's something going on with perspective and everything that it just leads to that. But I don't want to dwell on the topic too much, because once I did get over that, I really fell in love with the game.
You had mentioned that you don't know many other folks that have played this, and truthfully, I'm in the same boat. My personal history is almost identical to yours. I played it for the first time for this show. I've had it in the backlog for a while, knew nothing about it for a long time. And once I learned a little bit about what it was going for, I had the thought that this would be difficult to find somebody that would be into it to jump on and talk about. So I vaguely remember sending you a couple of different choices of games that I was thinking of doing. I was like, hey, I think you might like some of these. Check it out. And you latched onto this one pretty quickly. And I remember being a little bit taken aback. And I was like, okay, let's do it. Much like you, I jumped in and I fell in love with it. This is easily going to be in my top 5 games that I've played this year in 2024.
And it is technically a puzzler. So like I have an affinity for that type of game. I know a lot of folks will compare this one to Portal and some other things like that. So it really fell into something that I knew I would probably like.
Totally, I'm right there with you. I also, oh man, I love Portal. It's so much fun. Pretty much like always wanting to play Portal at least a little bit.
Mm-hmm. We've got a buddy in our community Discord that I'm pretty sure if we just did Portal episodes every month, he would be very pleased.
Well, add me to him because I would too. Speaking of folks that have played this game, the community forum, we don't have any responses from the community forum this week. Typically, if you're new, the community forum is where we invite folks from the Discord to give some brief thoughts about the games we're playing, the topics we're talking about. But for the Talos principle, nobody took the bait. Not surprising, like we have both alluded to, it's not the crazy popular game that The Last of Us is or Spec Ops is. So not surprised, but hopefully this episode draws some folks in. So before we get into all of that, let's talk about some background and some hard facts about this game. This was released on PC initially in December of 2014, PS4 the following October, and Xbox One in 2018, and Switch in 2019. This was developed by Crow Team. Had you heard of Crow Team before this game?
I had not, and I don't want to. Well, I'm about to blow what you're gonna say because you shared your outline with me. But they are the developers behind Serious Sam. Is that correct?
That is correct. And hey, man, I like I said, I shared this with you because you're the co-captain. Feel free.
But that blew my when I read that, dude. I was like, you got to be kidding me, because Serious Sam is very unserious. And like the juxtaposition of that game and this game, it's fun that the same developer made both games.
Yeah, my understanding is that while they were developing, I think it was Serious Sam 4, they were playing around with different gameplay ideas. They came up with the gameplay for the Talos principle in doing that, and then that's when they brought in the writers from that were external to the team at the time to help out.
Okay.
As you had mentioned, this was published by Devolver Digital, who just seemed to put out great game after great game. In fact, now that I think about it, the last episode you were on was Death's Door, and I think that was Devolver too, wasn't it?
Yeah, I think it is. Yep.
Yeah, not surprising. That game is terrific.
It is. It's I'm a big Zelda fan too, so it's a Zelda-like, and they did a bang up job with it.
Absolutely, they've got a great eye. Now, Crow Team is a small team, and as such, there are 3 fellas, and I'm going to pronounce these to the best of my ability: Davor Hunsky, Alan Ladovac, and Davor Tomachik. They share director, producer, and designer credits, with Ladovac also having a programmer credit. Now, the 2 writers that they hired externally were Tom Joubert and Jonas Karatzis. Composer on this one is, again, I'm trying my best, Damian Mravinac. We'll talk a little bit about the music here in a bit, but that is the core team. This grew out of Serious Sam and trying to play around with that title, with that engine. And we were given something that is very not serious, like Serious Sam. You get it? Clear as mud, right? Let's talk visuals. What did you think about the visuals in this game, Alex? You don't have to touch on your motion sickness caveat that you had mentioned before if you don't want to, but just in general, what did you think about how this game looked?
I think it looks really good. I think it's 10 years old now. and it looks great. I mean, it doesn't look super realistic, but it is of that time where, it was starting to look, games were starting to look more realistic. I actually played on the majority of the time I played on my PC, but I was able to get it to run on my Steam Deck as well. And it runs beautifully on both. You have to do some tweaks on the Steam Deck to get it going, but it looks great. It's not, I think they were striving for, a more realism look, but it still has a computer game look to it, which actually kind of plays into the narrative a little bit, interestingly enough. But there are, like, I think overall I did find myself, it's one of those things where, when you're immersed in the game and you're running around and, I think the settings are all great and everything. But what I was really most impressed by were the shadowing was quite good for its time, I would say. And then also the, like the backgrounds, etc. So like when there's different settings in the different areas of the game, but there was some in particular where you kind of look over, an ocean or whatever, and I just found myself thinking, that looks pretty nice.
I'm really glad that you're honing in on the ocean and the shadowing and the environment in general, because the first thing that I noticed, like as I'm going through, let's say within the first 2 hours, was that one, totally agree, like it looks really, really good, especially, I mean, I don't want to say especially given the time, because there were plenty of good-looking games in 2014, but it looks great. But I think it benefits because this game as a whole, with the exception of a few AI robots and some, some other robot hazards, let's say, this game is entirely environment. Like that is all it is. And by giving themselves such a singular focus, let's say, they were able to just polish and hone that into such an amazing degree. Looking out, I kid you not, man, I'm not one to do this in games very often, but I would just go to the edge of a cliff, of a seaside, and just look out into the horizon and just think like, man, doesn't this look gorgeous?
Right. I agree, man. 100%. I had the same experience. And then also throughout the game, when you hit these different settings, they all have different themes. And I think they changed enough where it's like, it's kind of fun where you notice how beautiful it is from, it's more, they have like, when you get later game, it's more of like a Gothic setting. And then mid game, you enter an area that has more of an Egyptian vibe. And I think, they move from the trees to the sand and all that stuff pretty well. And the lighting and the shadowing is great. That's something that I probably honed in on a little bit more than maybe most would, because I was playing on the Steam Deck, and I mentioned that you have to do some tweaking to get it to work. If you don't alter some of the settings at the beginning, like the shadows are completely broken. So I was able to see what the shadows look like when they're not performing the way they're supposed to. And there's one of those subtle things when it comes to visuals and graphics in video games where, if you're not paying attention to it, or if you don't see them when you're broken, you probably don't even notice how nice the shadows look, because they look the way they're supposed to. And so when they're rocking and rolling in this game, it's a part of the immersion, I would say. I actually pulled out, did you play primarily first person view or third person?
I'm glad that you brought that up. I primarily, with games like this, prefer first person.
Interesting. Cool. So I played this almost entirely third person view.
Okay.
Not necessarily because that's my preference overall, but that's one of the things that helped with the motion sickness I was experiencing.
Gotcha.
But that didn't take away from the visual aspect of it. But I think, thinking about it though, I think that the immersiveness that the environments, give you in this game, I think would be even more so if you're playing first person, just because of that like mental switch that you have when you're taking in a game like this in the first person view.
Totally. And this game is unique, and I don't know why I feel this way. It feels very 2014, 2015 to me. That means functionally nothing, but this game is unique insofar as you get 3 different third-person views over each individual shoulder and one directly behind. Maybe I just don't play enough third-person games, but I don't feel like that's a very common camera setup of choices.
No, that's something I've noticed in a few different games, and I don't really understand why they do that. There's got to be a reason. I just don't know what it is.
I mean, it's got to be just preference, right? I mean, yeah. I know I tried it a little bit over the right shoulder, and I couldn't stand it. Left shoulder is okay. I did do a bit of this in third person with the camera centered, over neither shoulder, just right behind. And that's what I prefer if I'm not doing first person.
Yeah, I think that's what I did as well. The only thing I can think of functionally, if you're playing like a third person shooter, like it might give you a little bit of a advantage to be able to see around corners. But otherwise, I think you're right. I think it's just preference.
Well, you're onto something there because there were a few puzzles where I switched to third person as a pragmatic concession.
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, this leads us right into the mechanics pretty well because as a whole, let's talk about difficulty first. I know that's not in my notes, but this game, I remember when I first started it. By the way, I started this on PS5, decided to switch to PC for literally no reason at all, just because I saw that I'd picked it up on sale for like a couple bucks. You can play it on either, it works great. But I played through it on PC, and I remember in the first 2.5 hours, in one of the Discords, I don't remember which one, I said, like, I'm having a blast. This is a lot of fun. I hope it gets more challenging because in the beginning, I felt like it was fairly easy. And there hits a point, where that is a very asymptotal, is that the right word? Asymptotal curve of difficulty where it just gets real tough.
It does. I think it's this game, and we'll talk about this when we get to story a little bit too, but it does not hold your hand. Well, at least it doesn't overtly hold your hand, right? So like there's a lot of how the story rolls out, and even the gameplay mechanics, it wants you to play. It kind of drops you into this environment, and it wants you to figure things out for yourself. And it does a really good job of that. And I think that part of that is having that easiness involved before it starts to ramp up. But by the time you hit endgame, like the puzzles and everything are super complicated.
They really are. I would be lying if I said I got through this whole thing without looking up a few solutions. I absolutely did.
Oh, dude, I have no shame. I was definitely on YouTube looking for walkthroughs on certain things. But that's part of that's something that we'll bring up on our pod as well from time to time. I mean, we're in this is a hobby of ours where we're rifling through these games at a pretty quick pace. If I had a whole year to play this game, I would tinker with it more. Or if I didn't have 1,000 games in my backlog, like I would tinker with this game more. But at a certain point, I think you kind of lose a little bit of that romance, I think, when you look up a guide. But at the same time, we've got lives, we've got other games we want to play, and it's okay to check out that guide.
Oh, totally. There's no guide shaming here. Enjoy games how you want to enjoy them.
Right.
That's kind of my motto. That being said, there is only one difficulty here. The developers created these puzzles. It's kind of difficult to do a puzzle game with varying levels of difficulty. If you sit down and think about it, it can be done, but it's challenging. But this one only has one, and the difficulty curve that we just mentioned. I did feel like some of these puzzles, and I don't think we've talked about this off mic, so I'm curious if you agree with me. I felt like some of them, they gave me this distinct feeling that I used to have when I was a kid, playing PS1, Sega Saturn, PS2, and just goofing off in a game and trying to beat a level in a way that it did not want me to, in a way that the engine could not support. Kind of like a solution where everything is held together by paper clips and chewing gum, that sort of feeling. And, in games of yesteryear, that just wasn't possible, right? Because, the code was more limited. You just had to solve it one way. This game, I'm fairly certain you can solve a lot of these puzzles in a couple different ways. And some of them definitely did have that feeling, to me anyway, of like, yeah, this is a kind of a janky solution, or like, yeah, this is held together by chewing gum.
Right.
And I don't know if I'm alone in that, but some of these solutions really, really felt that way to me. And I'm not saying that as a con. It's something that I definitely noticed. Like this game definitely wants you to think outside of the box in terms of everything, but in terms of gameplay, yes, that too. Like some of these puzzles have to be really set just so, and you're really, really pushing it up against the brims of like shooting lasers right around a corner, and with very little wiggle room. It's tough. I don't know. Do you does any of this resonate with you? Do you think I'm full of baloney? Like, what do you think?
No, man, I love that you bring it up because it is something that I thought about a lot while I was playing, but I never took the time to figure out if it was true. Which is interesting because it plays into some discussion we might have about consciousness and whatnot later on. But and it's also interesting, because I've recently played The Legend of Zelda Echoes of Wisdom. This is the new Zelda game that came out that truly encourages you to break the game and to do solutions that, you maybe, that you just like are really creative with the things that you can think up of. So I was coming off of that game to play this game. So that type of thought was definitely very much top of mind for me. And a lot of the puzzles, I have to imagine there's multiple ways to do it, but I didn't ever find out if that was the case. But there are some things, like kind of like you were saying, like there are certain scenarios where I'd set something up and I'd be like, this seems so obscure. Like I can't imagine that everybody's tackling it this way. And with the the whole idea and how this game kind of trains you to question humanity and consciousness, that furthers I wonder, is this game, are there multiple solutions or is it only one and I'm being made to feel like there's multiple? And I don't know because I never bothered to check it out. But I do love that you brought that up because it is something that I was grappling with as well.
Yeah, dude, that's a really germane point of discussion. I think you're right. I think it is encouraging us to think about how we go about solving these. Some of them are like definitively like there's one way you can do this only. Especially ones that involve more objects like fans and such, which by the way, we'll talk about how all this works in just a moment. I feel like I say that a lot on this show. We're getting there. Just a minute. Hold on. It's part of what makes podcasts special, right? It's an organic discussion. It's like we're all sitting together in a coffee shop or a small auditorium. But yeah, I tend to agree with you, man. I think some of these are meant to spark this discussion with the community, especially about like, hey, how did you solve this? Oh, you did it that way? Well, check out this. This is how I did it. Oh my God, I would have never thought about that. And that's one of the beautiful, we just released our episode on why do we play games. And that's one of the beautiful things about games like this is it creates a community where people come together, not necessarily to compete, but to share expression. And I mean, just in terms of gameplay, let alone talking about everything we'll talk about here in probably like 40 minutes or so. But it's just there's so much about this game that's so beautiful, and that is chief among them.
Yeah, I thought it was really interesting too around this subject. So the game has a communal aspect of sorts. So when you're going around, there's QR codes, and you can go up and you scan them, and it's essentially a message from like a past participant or a past robot that has done some of these challenges that you're doing. Various different messaging throughout. But what I thought was really cool, and I'm curious if you experienced this as well because you switched over to Steam. Those messages that they have signatures on them, and all of the signatures, I can't remember what they are right now, but there's various different sigs that everybody will see. But the communal aspect that's there is that because we're connected on Steam, Rick, your handle would show up on some of these messages.
Oh yeah,
which is like super fun. So like I'd be going around, I'd read some messages, and it would be signed by Bud Dink or whatever you are on there. And then
I'm Bud Dink.
Yep,
Bud Dink from '90s TV show Doug.
Yeah. So it was like that was like always made me chuckle. I've got a handful of screenshots. I'll try and send one your way. Where it's it's you basically trying, leaving a message about struggling with something that was happening in the game, which I always had a little chuckle whenever I'd come across them.
Oh my goodness, I completely forgot to put that in the notes. Yeah, you're right. Now that you mention it, I saw a couple from a friend of mine from college, but also from our mutual friend Dave Jackson of Tales from the Backlog. I saw a couple from him on PS5. Yeah, that's what a delightful little thing. All of these messages that you can leave are pre-baked. You can't just write whatever you want. Right. But they give you a decent amount, like, relating to the puzzles, relating to the meta aspect of the game, and how delightful to just find one from your friends. It's so neat. There's another community aspect of this, of like sharing. I don't know, this might be a mod, but like, or it might be a custom thing. I don't actually know. I didn't look too far into this, but sharing tracks of your own or like dev tracks.
Oh, interesting.
I don't know. I didn't look into that too much, so I'm really hesitant to speak on it. But All this to say, the sense of community that this game tries to foster is really something special. And more games are starting to do that. I'm thinking of Animal Well is a great example. Have you played that at all? It seems like an Alex kind of game.
It is right on my alley as far as being a Metroidvania and whatnot. I have not played it yet, but I hope to. It's in the backlog.
Let's talk about this game, the Talos Principle mechanics, for just a sec. The tempo of the game is more or less the same from start to finish. You are going to be solving these puzzles. These essentially go from point A to point B, from beginning to end, and you're solving a bunch of these with various tools at your disposal and various hazards that oppose you. The goal in each of these is to go from the beginning, point A, to point B to collect a Tetramino. No, really, like an actual Tetramino. I know Low 5 has a very passionate view on Tetris.
That's correct. Tetris is the greatest game of all time, Rick. So you ask my co-host and brother about that, and he might have a different opinion, but he's not here right now. So that's word. that's word on the game. So I was pleased that Tetraminos were in this game, and that was another thing that I was like, oh, sick. And it was also kind of fun because as you collect those throughout, it enters another puzzle minigame within the game, which is always kind of fun with puzzlers when you have a puzzle game that you're playing, and then there's a mini puzzle to take care of within that.
Yeah, the way this works is there are three hub worlds, A, B, and C, and each of these hub worlds will have, I think it's 7 or 8 subworlds within it, and each of those subworlds will have like 4 to 7 courses of Tetraminos inside. So there's no shortage of puzzles. You're going to be doing a lot of puzzling. And like you said, once you have enough Tetraminos, you can enter like a mini puzzle within the game of sorting all of the Tetraminos into a square. You might collect all the green ones, and that is for this power-up. You might collect all of the yellow ones, and that is to get into this next world. And, if you don't have enough yellow ones, but you have too many green ones, well, you got to go back and collect more yellow ones. They're each color-coded, so they all have a function. But you do that, you collect them, you put them together in a square, and that will help you progress through the game. Now, there's one color, red, that you do need every single one for, but unless I'm mistaken, I don't think you need every single Tetramino other than red. Am I right in that? Am I misremembering?
I think that's correct. I'm not for sure, but I think you're right. I think the a really cool thing about this game too, we alluded to it a little bit previously, but they don't do a lot of hand holding, and with these Tetraminos, like what it does do a great job is signposting. So when you're dropped into the game, there's a series of doors or whatever you can enter, and there's a sign outside the door that shows what Tetraminos are going to be in that area that need to be collected. And then once you go into that area, there's various different signs that point in the direction, and you can follow those. So there's no map in this game. It doesn't tell you what you're supposed to be doing, but the signposting is it's expertly done. Which is it's pretty cool. And then when you find an area or where you come to a door that's been locked that has this mini game that you use the Tetraminos for, it will in the upper left hand part of your screen show you the shapes, the color shapes that you need to collect to unlock either a door or unlock one of these other powers or mechanics that you end up using throughout the game. And I think it creates this very interesting, fun cycle, which is quite cool.
Totally. And to your point about the expert signposting, if your next upgrade, whether it's to the next world or for another little toy that we're going to talk about in a second, if that is color-coded green and you are getting really stuck on the yellow puzzles in your current world, you can leave those behind for the moment. And even the narrator, Elohim, will chime in if you get stuck, which I imagine everybody does.
If the answer does not come to you, do not despair. The worlds of my garden are many. My child, there is no shame in seeking another path. Leave this mystery for another day.
Indeed, and what would frustrate me when I was like cooking on a puzzle, just taking my time. Sometimes the big boomy voice would come in and be like, "Hey, like," I'm like, "Nah, dude, I'm on this. Like, just give me another 2 minutes."
You got to have faith in me, man.
Yeah.
These toys, each puzzle, and not every puzzle will use all of these. They're kind of dispersed. Different puzzles will use different combinations, but these toys can appear in various puzzles, and some of them are unlocked from the start, and some you need to unlock. So the ones that are unlocked from the start, I think it's mainly just the jammers. These jammers can be pointed at either blue force field doors or the hazards, like the little robots that will destroy you, or the turrets that will shoot you if they run into you, or if you run into them, excuse me. Those jammers will stop those and let you pass. These doors, these blue doors, are generally going to be in almost every puzzle, and to remove them, you have to either use the jammer or use some other toy that you can unlock. There are also other mechanics that are unlocked from the start, like pressure plates that serve as like on-off switches. And I think that's it. Is that it?
That sounds right. I'm trying to think.
Because I have one here under the unlocked section that I'm pretty sure should be under the locked section, the cubes.
Right. Yep. Otherwise, I think it adds up.
But the real fun comes in with these toys that you have to unlock. And by the way, that's just my term for them, toys. They're not actually called that. These are fun, and they create some variety in these puzzles. Like the first one is the cube. Excuse me. The actual name is the hexahedrons. That's one of the first ones you unlock. I love the description on these. The description reads, "The hexahedron is a strange shape that may appear to be a cube if you don't look too closely at it. If you do, you will realize that it is actually a hexahedron, which is a polyhedron with 6 faces. Totally different." And that got a laugh out loud for me. That is my kind of humor. That's very funny.
Yeah, there's nice little things that sprinkled throughout this game.
Yeah, if you're at home listening, just try and picture a hexahedron, which is, again, a polyhedron with 6 faces and a cube, and I'm sure you'll find that they're totally different. That's the first one you unlock, but you also unlock several others, like fans. That's self-explanatory. They can launch you, and they can launch certain objects like cubes. You unlock connectors. These are finicky, and these ended up giving me the most trouble out of all of them. They take a source of light, either red or blue, and will connect that light to a nodule that corresponds to red or blue, and they will open a door or power up a fan. They serve as a power source of some kind. It helps you connect a line from the energy source to the nodule without moving in a straight line, if that makes sense. So it can be used to move that line of light in an L shape, for example, or more shapes if you have multiple connectors.
Yeah, and you brought up the 2 different colors, so the red and the blue, and you're unable to cross those colors. And if you do, it will disrupt whatever connection you're trying to make. And you can also, your person or the character can disrupt those as well, which sometimes is something that's part of the puzzle. I would agree, they're the platforms can get kind of complex as well. But I would say that the connectors I would always refer to them. I was always kind of thinking of them as lasers, but the connectors, they are probably the most complex puzzle piece of this game. I tend to agree.
Oh yeah, it's what gave me the most grief. It's what made me feel like some of my solutions were very janky. Like far and away, the lasers were the jankiest.
Right, because sometimes you've got like a laser placement, and it's like, it seems like the fact that it's giving me just this little bit of space to get around this corner, and it doesn't look quite right. I'm like, I don't know, there must be another way to do this, but I'll never know.
The other 2 power-ups that you can get, the other 2 toys, are playback, which is kind of self-explanatory. You press record on this thing, and you can move and do what you got to do. And then when you press play, you essentially have a carbon copy of yourself that's doing these things, standing on switches, using a jammer to let you through. And what's neat about these, well, first of all, this made me think of Blinks the Time Sweeper immediately. Like, it's the same exact power-up.
Mm-hmm.
But what's neat about this is if you've got one jammer, let's say, and you press record and you take that jammer and you open up one door. Once you press play, your copy will take the jammer, but it doesn't take your jammer. Do you know what I mean? This is a little weird to talk about. It takes another carbon copy of that jammer, so you functionally get two. And that's like the first thing you get to do with this playback power up. It blew my mind. Like I was hooting and hollering. I was like, this is too cool.
It is, and it's by this time in the game, we'll talk more about this in the story section probably, but by this time, you mentioned anybody listening to your description, I mean, I don't think I could describe it any better, but that's not something that can happen in reality, right? Like at least not that I know of. So that was like one of the things where the game kind of breaks itself in a way, but it's totally normal in the setting that makes you question what's going on in this environment.
Absolutely. The last power up, just to get through it, is a little platform that you can carry. This is almost always used in conjunction with the playback power up. So you can hit record, carry a platform, and then whenever you play it back, you can jump on that platform. That's pretty much how it's used most of the time, not always, but most of the time. But all of these together, I know it might sound a little bit confusing us just listing them out like this, but all of these together create just a toolkit for a wide array of expressive play and expressive puzzle solving. And it's just very exciting to get into the dirt and play around with these and try and rig up these different solutions, whether it's what they intended or maybe something a little different. It's really, really exciting. And if you're not planning on playing this, if you're just listening to this because you're a fan of the show or, whatever reason you have for listening, I think we both encourage you to check some of these out on YouTube and just see what this is all about. There are whole playlists of people playing every puzzle in this game. So if you don't mind seeing a solution to each of them, go nuts. Like it's very cool. The longest ones are like 2 to 3 minutes.
Yeah, I think it's interesting too. Like I mentioned the signposting earlier. So when you enter an area, underneath the tetraminos that it shows you that you can get in whatever area, there's a little symbol that shows you what tools you'll be using for that particular puzzle. And then once you enter the room, each room has a title, and the title is always a little clue on how to solve that room, which is another like fun thing that I thought this game did a really good job at.
Yeah, good call. That I did like that too. Some of them are a little more abstract, but
totally.
Some of them, like there's one I don't remember exactly what you have to do, but it involves you like running through a field of these hazards that will kill you if they touch you. And I think the title was like Prison Escape, and it's like it kind of is like that. That's very cool.
When I was getting stuck in a few different areas, sometimes I would automatically, I think you hold down the Y. I was using a controller for most of the time. So like on the Xbox layout or PC layout, I guess it would be the Y button. I always get confused because I'm always going between like that layout and Nintendo's. But it would be the Y button. If you hold that down on your controller, that restarts. Or you can run into one of the obstacles and essentially kill yourself, and it resets whatever room you're in. But just to see that title again, so I could get a little clue.
Yeah. You don't have lives in this game or anything like that. So resetting a puzzle or intentionally running into a turret or a bomb robot, it's totally fine. It'll just reset you. And sometimes that's good. Like sometimes you set up a puzzle and you really screw everything up and you set things where they shouldn't be, and you realize, like I did, it's going to take longer to clean this up than it would to just hold reset or run into this turret. I don't have a lot of notes for music and sound, but I did want to talk about it a little bit. I thought the score for this game was just sparse enough to be appropriate.
Yeah, I mean, you're the music guy, so
Well, I appreciate that. But when you boot it up, you get a lot of there are some choral singing, some low choral singing, sort of like chanting, but not quite, with just like low orchestral sounds and like the dinging of a bell, and that's your title screen. And a lot of the time when you're going through these levels, you actually don't have any music, none at all. So if you are somebody that likes to play a game and listen to podcasts, like Lo-Fi gaming, then then this is like the perfect game for that.
I agree. I think it's it's not that the music's not good or anything. Like I think it is. And it plays into the environmental aspect of it quite well, I think. And also there's strong like religious undertones to this whole environment that you're in and everything. And I think some of that the music plays into that a little bit. Like you're in like a big almost cathedral area, and the music playing it gives that vibe, and it plays into that quite well. It wasn't really until Endgame where there's a sequence where like I think the music is more important than the rest of the game, I would say, when you're playing Endgame, because it really ramps up and it builds the excitement quite a bit. But it's not a game that you're not going to catch me listening to the soundtrack necessarily without playing the game.
Totally agree. We'll talk more about the religious stuff during the story, but there are hidden areas in the game that you can get to called Messenger's Gardens. There are a couple of these, and I tell you what, the music here changes, and it gets to be almost cliche in terms of sacred music, where there's like this piano playing very simple melodic arpeggios, standard tonal harmony, like major, minor chords, nothing crazy like diminished, augmented, or altered chords. And it's playing those up and down, while a choir of female voices will be just singing on neutral syllables like ah. And as cliche as it is, that combined with how vivid and floral and serene the Messenger's Gardens are depicted, and combined with Elohim coming in, giving you these words of encouragement, these like encouragement not just to progress through the game, but encouragement of faith. It made me emotional.
Sure. Yeah. No, I feel that. I think Elohim's voice is quite good, as well as I believe is it Alexandra, often referred to as Alex.
Alexandra Drennan, yes.
Yeah, so she's another character that you find these voice recordings, and I think she, the character who did, or the actor who did Alex's voice is also quite good. I think there's, sometimes when you play a game like I don't know a whole ton about voice acting, but she did a really good job of inflecting emotion into what was happening. And that was actually it was always a treat to come across some of those tapes or the recordings from Alex. Cause one, I was always interested in what she was recording and had to say, but two, like, I just think that similar to Elohim's like booming God voice, like there was just something, I really bought into her character because of, the actor's work.
When I was a little girl, one of our teachers, Mrs. Higgins, told us to make a time capsule, write letters to the future, so one day we could remember what it was like to be children. I thought it was stupid, so I didn't do it, which I really regret. So, I guess I'm gonna make one now, bury it in the archive instead of under a tree. I don't know if anybody will ever find it, but somehow it seems important to keep talking, to keep thinking, for as long as I can. When I was in 9th grade, my parents took me to Pompeii. At first, I was amazed by the feeling of walking through an ancient city. But then I suddenly got scared. I realized that I was walking through a real place where real people had lived, people like myself, with mothers and fathers and lives and hopes and dreams. And now it was all gone forever. I ran to my father, crying, and told him about this. And he said, I remember so clearly, he said, Yes, but we are here. So long as there are people in the streets, the past isn't really gone.
Oh, I'm about to blow your mind here a little bit. So Elohim is voiced by Timothy Watson. Great, big, booming voice. Now, Timothy Watson's IMDb has a bunch of other video games like Xenoblade Chronicles, Dragon Age Origins, Dragon Age 2, stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
Alexandra's voice actor was Erin Fitzgerald. And I said to myself, that name sounds awfully familiar. I'm going to go to the IMDb. And it's also got some video games, but also known for the voice of Naz and May Kanker in Ed, Ed, and Eddie.
Oh, no way.
I'm telling you, I'm looking right at it. Crazy, right?
That is wild. That's fun.
Also, Naz and May Kanker. Those are two very different voices.
And got some range.
Yeah, she did great. We'll talk more about Alex in a bit here, but those are really the only two voices that you hear in this game. The story, it's creative how the story is told to you, but those are the two voices that you hear. They don't come up all the time. They're fairly sporadic, but they picked two terrific actors for it. Yeah, it's really good. Other than that, there's not a lot of sound design. You'll hear the lasers. I will say there are computer terminals that you can interact with, and whenever there's something to interact with that you haven't read before, the computer will have a little eye that flashes, and every time the eye moves or blinks, it makes these boop boop noises. And sometimes I couldn't find the computer, and it drove me crazy.
Oh,
just
funny.
Kept hearing the beeps and boops. Like, where is that blasted thing?
The spatial sound is pretty good on that, I thought, because I had the same thing. Because at first, when I'd hear that beep, I was like, "Oh man, annoying," because it's an annoying computer beep. But then it's part of the story. But I started to look forward to it because it starts to unveil more of what's going on or whatever. So I get excited. But then if you run in the opposite direction, it gets a little quieter. So there's some. Again, it's this is more sound wise, but it's again this game is just expert level signposting throughout.
Yeah, that spatial sound is really nice. And if you're like me and you lose track of where that terminal is, you can just take a listen. Is it getting closer, farther away, hot or cold? It'll help you out. And that I'm trying to think. There's definitely other sounds in the game, but I'm blanking on them. Are there any other sounds that are benefited with the spatial awareness thing?
Not that I can recall offhand.
Yeah, me neither. Well, if there are any, and we have both forgotten, I'll add them in the edit. But sound design as a whole, it's pretty good. It's appropriately sparse. It does not detract from the experience. But like you said, Alex, probably not going to be listening to the soundtrack of this very often.
No, but to your point, I think it works with the game. It definitely helps with the immersion aspect of pulling you in and kind of getting you to connect with the happenings of the game itself.
Okay, we talked about the mechanics. A lot of this is interesting to talk about, but the real magic comes from playing it, which I encourage you all to do. But I think now we're going to transition into talking about the story, what's actually happening in the game, as well as the grand themes. So before we do, here's your little spoiler wall. If you don't want to know anything about the story or the themes, dip out now. Although I would say, this game, even if you do know exactly what's going on, it's still 100% worth playing.
I think too, just to piggyback on that a little bit, like the story, there is an underlying story that everybody's going to get. But what's beautiful about this game is that the story kind of unfolds through your experience. So everybody's going to have a slightly different take on what's happening and their decisions. It's not like The Witcher 3 or something where you're just, I guess, whatever. But I guess my point that I'm trying to make is that your experience in this game is going to have an impact on what the story of this game is. So even though like speaking to the story will spoil some aspects, but you could honestly play this game after listening to this podcast and us telling you about the story and have an entirely different interpretation of what's going on.
Yeah, aptly said, my friend, aptly said. With that, why don't we go ahead and dive in? I hope you stick around. This is going to be a lot of fun. Let's talk about what's going on in the distant future of the world and why something like the Talos principle was even brought up. Okay, so two things before we dive in. I wanted to create two little caveats. There are two people that might be uninterested in this conversation moving forward. Two groups of people. The first group would be the experts. You know, the experts in religion, experts in psychology insofar as consciousness, or philosophy so insofar as free will. And that's fair. You know, you and I, Alex, are amateurs. And while the root of amateur in Latin is amare, which means love, the love of something, we are very much just amateurs. And that does mean both in terms of scope of knowledge, but in terms of, you know, loving talking about this stuff. So if that's you, if you are an expert, you know, feel free to stick around, but we're probably not going to challenge your thinking as much as we might hope we do. But the second group of people that might be uninterested, this is the group that I hope I'm able to hook in. And this is the group that might hear ideas and hear discussions about philosophy and consciousness and free will and think that it's impractical and it doesn't matter. You know, the people that think like, you know, I've got bigger things to do. Good for you that you can sit and talk about philosophy and consciousness, but, you know, I've got work in the morning. I've got a 9 to 5. I've got a family to feed. I don't have time to be thinking about this. I've got real things to worry about. And I have to be honest with you, Alex. When I was younger, I definitely felt this way. And I mean younger, like high school age. I definitely felt sometimes like thinking about things like consciousness and free will wasn't a waste of time, but wasn't practical. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. No, I feel you. I've always been kind of into it. I'm not going to pretend like I have the answers. And if any of those experts had stuck around this far, you don't have any answers either, man. But that's kind of the fun of it, man. That's part of human experience. And I think, you know, as we'll get into a little bit here, it's what this game does a really good job of trying to mimic the human experience and consciousness to an extent, better than any other practice that I've ever experienced in my life. You know, like that's not my own true human experience. Like I've never seen a game mimic the human experience or like question consciousness like the Talos principle does. So it's pretty cool.
Oh, here. And that human experience is something we'll talk about here in a moment. That group of folks that think like, you know, this isn't worth talking about, what I would encourage, how I would encourage one to think about this would be that, you know, things like philosophy, discussions on philosophy, they work in tandem with science. They don't work against it. You know, science tells us how the world is in terms of biology, in terms of what we're looking at, but it can't tell us about morals and ethics and what it means to be a human. That's where philosophy comes in. And it's very much a yin-yang relationship, right? They bleed into each other. They support each other. This isn't, you know, it's not, you know, you can be a philosophy guy and just not care about science. It doesn't work that way. It's a holistic ideal. And I would argue, we're not going to go into this example just yet because I want to talk about the story of the game real quick. But anybody that has ever sat down on the playground, or maybe you're a little older in middle school, sitting at a table, you know, you want to impress your friends and you ask something like, did you ever think, man, that your green isn't the same as my green, man? If you've ever thought that, and I think most of us have, you have pondered a philosophical question of consciousness, and we'll talk about that in a moment. But before we jump in there, let's talk about what happens in the Talos principle. So this game begins, you begin as an android, and you start in first person, and you kind of raise your hands up as you're waking up to shield your face from the sun. So it's no secret that you're an android. You seemingly have human consciousness, and you're in this wondrous, scenic garden. And this is where you're greeted by your booming voice and companion, Elohim, saying that this world was created for you.
Behold, child, you are risen from the dust, and you walk in my garden. Hear now my voice, and know that I am your maker, and I am called Elohim. Seek me in my temple, if you are worthy.
Just because of the kind of stuff that I like to read for fun, as soon as I heard Elohim, I perked up and I did the meme of Leo pointing, because Elohim is, it's an ancient ancient Hebrew word that means God or gods.
Right.
So right away, it's like, I know where this is going. And Elohim tasks us to solve these puzzles in this land and retrieve his sigils, because this is Elohim's will. Immediately, it becomes very clear that this is a sort of retelling or heavy allusion to the Garden of Eden. I had mentioned up front that I did a lot of external research. For the first time in this show, I sat down and reread the Bible. For this game, I reread the book of Genesis.
I was going to say, not the whole Bible, I hope. This is a long read.
No, it is a long read. It is a long read. I sat down and read the book of Genesis again, because that's where a lot of this game's references sit in. There's some to the Gospel of John and Matthew, but, I'm surprised it didn't happen for a JRPG, for as much as those, like Xenosaga and Xenogears talk about the Bible. But, anyway, this is a sort of a retelling or a reimagining of the Garden of Eden, with Adam and Eve. And as such, you might not be surprised to hear that we encounter something that's known as a serpent in the machine. We encounter this third character named Milton. At first, we don't know his name is Milton. He disguises himself as a computer program, the Milton Library Assistant. But it turns out that it is a sort of sentient AI, and he is going to try to get us to stray from Elohim's will, stray from the path, and make us consider this idea of free will. He is going to be working against Elohim's wishes. Elohim has but two wishes. He wants us to stay faithful and solve his puzzles, and also to stay away from the tower.
Let this be our covenant. These worlds are yours, and you are free to walk amongst them and subdue them. But the great tower, there you may not go. For in the day that you do, you shall surely die.
Now, the tower here is kind of a dual reference to the Tower of Babel and the apple in the Garden of Eden, the apple, the fruit of knowledge. Now that I think about it, I don't think it's ever specifically called an apple. Why is it always depicted as an apple?
I don't know.
It's not even my favorite fruit. I don't know where I'm going with this. I'm sorry, man. But there's a reason, and there's a reason I think they use the tower and not just like a fruit. It's better gameplay. I mean, you're going up a tower, doing some light platforming, running upstairs. It's fun. But the Tower of Babel in the Bible was in the story was a symbol of man's hubristic nature, a sort of blasphemous defiance to the rule of God, which is where God stepped in and sort of muddled up their language so they couldn't communicate. But so too here, like Elohim says, do not go to the tower, for then you will surely die. It's sort of a dual reference to the fruit of knowledge and to the Tower of Babel. Trying to traverse it will give you knowledge that only Elohim is meant to have, only God. This is divine knowledge, and is also a sort of blaspheme to him, to Elohim. So it's a sort of dual reference there. When it comes to references like this, Alex, like, what are your thoughts? Do you like these? Do you find them to be a little bit too prevalent and played out in video games? What's your thoughts?
Yeah, well, I mean, full disclosure, I was born and raised into a Catholic family. So like a lot of this, all the undertones of Christianity, it's unavoidable for me, because that's, my human experience is that's just something that I went to Catholic school when I was in grade school. I even went to Catholic high school. I went to Christian college. I don't practice my faith like today. Not to say I'm not a believer or anything. It's just I have a different view on things. But that that the said is that seeing this type of stuff, it's like so right away it's interesting, right? Because for instance, this Tower of Babel, that Elohim, right away with the Elohim voice and everything, and they named Elohim, I was like, okay, we got God here, so I understand what's happening, like and then it put me like I understood what's happening in the story, but then it says when he tells you not to go to the tower, immediately I was kind of like trying to decide how, like I knew I was gonna go there. I was like, there's no way I'm gonna play this game, which I think technically you can avoid the tower completely. But my curiosity wasn't going to allow that. But I did fall into collecting the sigils and avoiding the tower for some time. I'm curious how quickly you checked out the tower. Not necessarily traverse through it, but how quickly you went to go. How quickly did you defy Elohim's will?
Well, you know me. I mean, I've had a little defiant streak in me since I was a kid. I went to the tower pretty early on. It becomes clear that you're not going to be able to traverse this thing in any great length right away. Each floor of the tower is going to be protected, and the tower doors use red sigils. These red sigils become more prevalent once you get into worlds B and C, but at first you're not able to get that many of them. And the doors take a lot to unlock because, like we alluded to before, they use every red sigil in the game. You have to collect all of them. So I went up, I couldn't get too far. When you go up, interestingly, Elohim, as a computer program, does like a search for you and is not able to find you. And then when you come out, he'll give you a message saying that he knows what you've done.
And then basically asks you not to, suggest that you don't do that and you don't mess around with the tower. It's funny. I actually went through, there's the buildings, you start in building A, I want to say, and there's a building A, B, and C. So I went through and I unlocked all the buildings first without going into the tower. With the back of my mind, always kind of being like, okay, I want to check this tower out. Like, even if I don't need to in this game, I didn't really know at that point, like how important the tower was going to be. But it was always back in my mind. It's like, well, I know I'm going to go there eventually. I know I'm going to go there eventually. And it wasn't until I unlocked A, B, and C, and then it was like, okay, the only other thing I can do is just run around and do all these puzzles and collect all the sigils, or I can go check out this tower. And that's the point where I was like, okay, it's time for me to go against Elohim's will and check it out. But to go back to your original question about, do I think these tropes are played out? I mean, this beyond video games. I mean, these have been played out for thousands of years. But I don't think that really matters in the case of this particular game, because it's so integral to the setting that they're creating. They're using this trope to help set the stage for the growth that you're about to experience as your character. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense.
Right on. Yeah, it gets a little complex, and without like having the full experience of this game, it's kind of hard to like pinpoint or really explain the intention of the developers and the storytelling of this game. But at the same time, like I think that I would agree with you, or I don't know if you already said it, but you asked do I think this is outplayed or overplayed? I think it's definitely oversaturated, but at the same time, I think that it's not without purpose in this game, and I think that's why I appreciate it.
Totally. As much as I love the Persona games, the references that they use are mainly just references in name only, and maybe design of the monsters, but they don't mean anything deeper. You aren't being asked to think about these things, whereas here, it's the same story. And I realize, that was a kind of a banal question for me to ask. Like, do you think that this Bible story is, overdone? Spoiler alert, some of these stories were around before the Bible,
right?
Some of them, but this game uses them to an effect, not like Persona. As much as I love those games. And speaking of the storytelling, let's before we look at Elohim and Milton and Stratton and all of the consciousness free will stuff, let's just go through the events that happen in the story. So this story is told to you through logs of emails, text files, blog posts, things of that nature, and audio logs from Alexandra Drennan. So this is a summary of the story. And Alex, if I miss anything, please correct me. But this is what happens. At some point, a deadly virus broke out into humanity after it was defrosted via global warming. This virus was laying dormant in the ice caps. Global warming unleashed it. It began by causing an almost overnight extinction of orangutans. It's a primate virus, and it's deadly to primates, which means humans are in trouble. This doomed humanity. Along the way, we see blog posts, internet posts, emails, all of that from various different people, and notably, thoughts and exchanges from a group called IAN, the Institute of Applied Pneumatics. In addition to them, we also hear from Alexandra Drennan. Alex is a philosophy professor, not 100% clear, I don't think, unless I'm forgetting, but she is going to work with the Institute of Applied Pneumatics to create this life-saving project called EL, Extended Life. This project was to house all of human knowledge, everything, art, philosophy, literature, scientific advancements, the internet from 2009, every post you made where you smiled by putting :3, everything was in this computer. And they were going to use AI to help carry on our existence, to live on. It was built out of existing video game code, which is always kind of funny, and abandoned research projects. Alexandra Drennan was brought in because of her interest in what's called the Talos principle. It's this principle of philosophy that we'll talk about in a second, named after the Greek myth of Talos. And throughout this game, we get a lot of insight into the team, their thoughts and feelings as the project progressed, Alex's thoughts and feelings on not just the project, but life itself, and how things are progressing. And ultimately, yes, humanity does die out, but what we learn is that this simulation that we're in is indeed a simulation, and our AIs are being created to go through these tasks to test for consciousness and free will. All right, that was a lot, but Alex, did I miss anything notable that you caught?
No, that all checks out. I think the one thing that I was just thinking of as you're giving that explanation that I thought was cool that I picked up listening to Alex's recordings is that, you know, by the time you hit end game, you have an idea of how this whole project went, etc. But there's what I thought was cool is you don't know how much time has passed since this outbreak, right? And you don't know when if success happened, when. But there was a really cool recording where Alex she struggles with a lot of her philosophical understanding of life and consciousness, and is this even a good idea? Is she wasting her time, etc.? There's a lot of great recordings where she's kind of grappling with that. And then there was a cool recording where she's speaking kind of to herself, kind of to the, future, people that might be working on this. But I can't remember exactly what she said, but it was saying like she hopes that everything that she's done kind of sets them on the right path. And it sounds like that other folks are going to take on this work. So like where you might assume that in a scenario like this, our character Alex is the one who maybe achieved the end goal. That's maybe not the case, but she was definitely a key participant. But this story, the Talos principle, the game as a whole and what's going on, we actually have no idea how much into the future your experience as a player is, which I thought was pretty cool.
Yeah, it leaves a lot up to the imagination there. All we know is that humans, as far as we know, are long gone. And like you said, it ties into the endings a bit too. In one of the endings, you kind of get a better idea of how much time has passed. Ultimately, there are two kinds of endings. One where you accept your role with Elohim, and one where you transcend. So the acceptance endings, Elohim offers you eternal life if you, devote your faith and will to him. Do not climb the tower, solve and find all my sigils, be one with the voice of Elohim. And if you do that, you are granted eternal life with Elohim. You go into these double doors, and it's very much a representation of heaven. Like there's pearly gates, clouds in the sky. You're walking on clouds. It's very funny. But functionally, what this does is it kind of resets the whole system. Even though you get quote unquote eternal life with Elohim, it sort of reboots everything because you failed your independence test. Now that leads into ending 2, Transcendence. And this is the kind of canon ending. This is the ending that the game expects everybody to get, and is the quote unquote intended one. This is where you defy Elohim and climb the tower, which leads to this final gauntlet of puzzles that you're going to be doing with the aid of one of these other messengers called Shepherd, the Shepherd. And also, you're antagonized by another messenger named Samsara, which is a very interesting name given Samsara's, what Samsara is in the, I think, the Hindu faith, if I'm not mistaken. But you end up climbing and breaking free of this illusion of EL, extended life. And it turns out that was the goal of this project all along, is to demonstrate what this game believes separates humans from machines, and that is free will. This will break the virtual world down, and when you wake up, you can wake up with a cat if you found the secret cat ending, which I absolutely love. When you wake up out of the simulation, you walk outside of the EL facility that Ian, the Institute of Applied Pneumatics, created, and you get to see the ruins of humanity as this really dramatic music begins to swell. It's dramatic and hopeful in a way that gives you the feeling that life can move on now that we've demonstrated that we have humanity, that we have what's called phenomenal consciousness. We'll get there soon, I promise. Take a shot because I said that again. The presence of vegetation is there, the beautiful music. It's a very hopeful ending despite, humanity being extinct.
Right. It's a cool cutscene. Again, it's I think both ending. I don't know. I think it's a more rewarding ending, and you said it's probably the true ending, or true intended ending. I think if you were just to follow, and which is it's a path you can take, and it's a philosophical path too. But to just listen to Elohim the whole time and do the obedience part is that's a little bit more boring in my opinion. But it's interesting, and it actually I think. One of to go way back, I think one of the reasons that I was also excited is they've recently came out with the Talos Principle 2, and knowing that, not playing it at all, knowing that, seeing that ending, I was like, oh, all right. Very interested and intrigued to see how the story will continue.
I am very, very excited to do Talos 2. I really want it. I'm debating on whether I should play it first and then program it onto the show or just do it both at the same time. I have heard that a lot of folks like it more.
Interesting.
What I've heard more often than anything else is that folks will say, yeah, you can tell that it's the same team. Which
that's cool.
To me is a good thing, right? I mean, given everything they accomplished here.
Right.
But I'm with you. I really want to play it. And I'm also with you. I think the acceptance ending is a little boring. It's a little, it sets you up to, it almost expects you to play the role of Adam and Eve and take the fruit of knowledge and to demonstrate this free will. That's, if we're just going off of the Institute's plans, this is explicitly the case, because if you accept it, you fail your independence check and the whole thing starts over again, just resets. Now that we've talked about that, I want to, before we talk about, I think talking about Elohim and Milton will coincide nicely with free will, but I would like to revisit that conversation about consciousness, if that's all right.
Quickly before we do, there is a third ending, a third secret ending that you can get. In addition to the sigils that we mentioned earlier, there's stars, which are essentially like a more difficult little puzzle within the puzzle thing. Like when you're in different stages, you can find where you're going to get the sigil. In the same area, there will be a star, but there's something special you might have to do, or some sort of hidden area you might have to unlock. And as you collect those, you can use those to open more doors within the overworld area that end up allowing you to collect messengers, I want to say. Is that what it is? So basically, when you unlock that bit of the game, and you start unlocking these stars, you can use them to get these messengers, which are essentially a way of the game showing you tips of how to complete a puzzle if you're stuck, which I actually did not use because I just relied on YouTube when I was stuck. But it's a cool addition to the game. But if you collect all of those stars, there is a third scenario where you end up becoming a messenger yourself, which is cool, but I feel not as fulfilling as the true ending. So if I collected all those stars because I was like, I'm gonna get the best ending this way, I'd probably be upset.
Yeah, I suppose. Good catch, by the way. I forgot about the secret messenger ending. I guess it, in some ways, I think, okay, I think this game does explicitly want you to do the transcendence route. That being said, just like in other games that give choices, you know, games like Spec Ops: The Line, I'm just citing that because we just did an episode on it. It says as much about you, the player, and the person as it does about your player character based on what routes you take and decisions you make. So somebody that, you know, prefers the ending of becoming Elohim's secret messenger, I think that would maybe say a lot more about them. Like maybe they value this idea of faith higher. I think, you know, realistically speaking, I don't think anybody would be that much of a caricature of somebody that has a high level of faith to do that. I think this game is set up in a way that it kind of does not, it doesn't put you on rails, but it gently encourages you pretty consistently to go the transcendence free will route. Right. But I could see somebody, you know, siding more with the have faith route, you know, all things considered. Again, I think that's maybe just a bit of a caricature, but, you know, if I'm wrong, you know, I mean, like I always say, this isn't the end of a conversation. I'm just trying to start one. And if you think that I'm speaking out of turn, then by all means, let's keep the conversation going in the Discord.
I love that.
Thank you, buddy. I appreciate it. I'll make sure to tag you in all of the conversations too. I want to revisit this conversation about consciousness, because that is one of the two major themes of this game. So we already kind of talked about why this is important, right? You know, science cannot teach us about ethics, and philosophy cannot necessarily teach us about biological things and physics. Things like that. They work hand in hand. Imagine life without science and imagine life without philosophy. It's the same thing, if you ask me. Two sides of the same coin. Now, I mentioned an example earlier about color. You know, do you see the same green that I see? And this is something that this game grapples with. This idea of what's called phenomenal consciousness. This is something that's been debated about constantly. David Chalmers referred to this very famously in one of his books as the hard problem of consciousness, about when does something become a human. You know, we know that cats are alive, for example. We know that plants are alive. What makes our experiences fundamentally different that makes us human? There's still no answer to this. Philosophers debate this all the time. This is what's called phenomenal consciousness. It's also sometimes called experiential consciousness or qualia. And this is that experience of what does it mean to be a person versus something like access consciousness, which is, you know, what cats have, being hungry, feeling pain, things like that. The spoiler alert is, there's no answer. So if you're looking to find one on pixelprojectradio, well, I'm sorry, you won't. But that's kind of what this game centers around. At what point does a machine become conscious? And, well, I led off with this thought experiment, Alex, so I guess I'll ask you, do you feel like at the end of the Transcendence ending, do you feel like this machine effectively earned consciousness?
Man, I tell you what, Rick, there's never been a game that I finished and then had supplementary material and then like got in, because you sent over some really cool podcasts and videos or whatever, and I've just been grappling with that question now for about a week. And I would say a part of me wants to say yes, and a part of me wants to say no. And the tricky thing, I would say, for if we were going to position ourselves like fully into the game, like if the game was the experience of, you know, without me, the tricky part is there's another layer to this, right? There's me behind my computer screen playing this game. and inflecting my own experience onto it. And that's where it becomes complicated for me, because in the game, I would say yes, your AI, your robot, your android person or whatever wakes up and, per the game and per the narrative, has achieved this consciousness. It's, they deemed it, basically got it turned on, right? So it was running this program, it gets turned on because you've ascended the tower, because you've completed this thing. And throughout the game too, it's really interesting. Is it Milton? Is that the character within? It's like the AI program within the PCs that you run into that starts asking you questions and gets you to start defying a little bit of what's going on with Elohim. Is that Milton?
Yeah.
Okay. So Milton asks a lot of really great questions throughout too, that has your character start to question maybe what's going on with this whole simulation, but also some really great exercises in testing you as a player, and therefore the character's like understanding and thoughts on free will and consciousness, that you can actually, and this is where the game, like I think it's really cool, because a lot of the times in a game like this where they don't have any there's not like a narrator to these things, you are reading it, it can be pretty text heavy sometimes. I'll just be honest, like I will click through a lot of stuff in various different games, because I want to keep on doing what I was doing. And I did that at the beginning when I run into these, PC points or whatever. And then when I realized what was happening, and I mentioned earlier, I started to get excited when I heard that beep, because that beep signified that Milton was going to be back online. Because the way it works is you'll have a conversation with this AI, and then it will have to sign off for whatever reason, and you carry on. But then it became an exciting thing for me. It's like, oh, it's beeping, which means like Milton's back to like grapple with this idea of consciousness again and what it is to be human. So I go in and I answer a few more questions, and it's interesting because you can inflict some of your actual opinions on these things into the game, and the game, to my understanding, will change its narrative a little bit to kind of fit what you're telling it. There's certain things that, if you're not answering it the way that it's hoping that you will, it will kind of circle back and get you, and you'll be like, well, actually I've broken, what you're saying is contradictory to like, what we're talking about or whatever. So let's reapproach this, and it'll push you through that way. But super interesting, right? And I think that all this to say that if I remove myself and my humanity as Alex, the player, from this, I believe that the game showed us a story of success where this robot became conscious and achieved humanity to an extent, or I would just say too, it did achieve. But where it didn't is I'm the actual player, right? Like these are my decisions and my experience that I'm inflicting or reflecting upon this computer game, and that's where it becomes tricky, in my opinion.
It definitely does. And you had mentioned Milton's prompts. One of the things that I think Milton succeeds in speaking to the player rather than the player's character, the player's cipher, is in these conversations that very much do resemble philosophical lines of thought. You had mentioned some of his consciousness ones. He early on will ask you, like, what's the difference between a tree and a frog? And some of the answers are funny. You could say like, well, they're both green, or you could just say there is no difference. I don't know. But most people will say, well, the frog is alive in a way the tree isn't. And he'll say, okay, how so? You say, well, the frog has a sense of self. Trees do not have a sense of self. It's like, okay, so a frog has a sense of self. That means that it is more alive than a tree. How are frogs meaningfully different from humans? Sorry, one sec. How are frogs meaningfully different from humans? And
was that one of your kitties?
Yeah, yes, it was.
That was your cat interjecting, saying that it has free will, Rick.
Yeah. Well, exactly. But in a much higher way, did I have free will to push her out of the way?
Oh man,
we'll get there. But so, how are frogs different from people? One of the answers to that question will be like, I don't know, and I really appreciate that they put that in there, because that is like the question, right? What is phenomenal consciousness? And everything you say, and to the game's credit, Milton will basically go against you no matter what you say. It's set up that way so that Milton kind of can always be like, yeah, you're contradicting yourself. But what I love about it, going back to your point, is that it's gently nudging and kind of scooting you along to think about this stuff in your real life. What does make us different from a cat or a frog? We both feel hunger, we both feel pain, we both feel affection and the desire for affection. But what is it that makes us human? Because humans and cats are not the same, right? They just aren't. But what is it that makes us different? And it's that phenomenal consciousness, that qualia, experiential consciousness. But the problem is, how do we define that? We still do not have an answer to that. And, this idea of consciousness is fascinating because if we ever do find an answer to that, think of all the ethical things that will come up. If we can pinpoint consciousness, what's from stopping them? I don't mean to take a doomer approach to this, but what's from stopping them to test consciousness and say that, if you score lower on a test of consciousness, you lose your right to drive a car. Let's imagine somebody that's like 106 that scores lower, and then they say, well, you can't drive anymore. Okay, well, that's a pretty benign example, all things considered. But where does it stop? There are a million different ways you can go from here, and it's really fascinating to think about. And I think when people say that philosophy is boring, I think they're thinking of the thinker statue, or just thinking about logic in particular. Like, I don't want to do mathematical formulas to figure out if I'm right in saying that 2 + 2 = 4, and yes, people do that, but philosophy is bigger than that, especially the discipline of metaphysics. What makes us human? It's endlessly fascinating to me, and I love that Milton is kind of asking you, like, Alex, why is a frog different from a person?
Right. Yeah, it's wild, and I think that it's interesting. Like I just have to assume the writers of this game, the people that worked on it they must be grappling with some of these ideas themselves and are clearly well versed. And as I was, learning more about free will, consciousness, and some of the definitions that we have tried to, or some of the mindsets we try to put on this, there's 3 main ones that I've come across, and that's determinism, libertarianism, and compatibilism. Quick caveat,
Yes.
like the libertarianism is not our political libertarianism, but it's for the case of this, it's different. But it's interesting how those play into this game, though, because with determinism, that means that all actions are determined by a prior causes, right? So we don't actually have free will. Like everything is dictated by previous happenings. So free will is an illusion. Decisions are dictated by external forces, biology or environment, etc. So that would be in the game. That would be Elohim's rules. You're supposed to stick to the rules. This is how it works. You go through this programmed set. And then libertarianism is this idea that true free will exists independent of these external causes. So people, or maybe even AIs, who knows, can make genuinely independent choices. So in the game, that would be deciding to climb the tower, right? And then compatibilism is free will and determinism coexisting together. Choices are free when aligned with one's internal motives and influenced by external factors. But in the game, this would be, I suppose that would be the protagonist is the autonomy that you start to develop, becoming aware of Elohim's influence. And that is when I was starting to think about these ideas on free will and consciousness, is the camp that I tend to fall into. Is that, I feel that as, or me as a person, I'll just speak as myself, but, thinking of humanity, it's like, I do believe that there's these external influences that set folks on a path for things that are going to happen and the choices that they make. But I also still, I guess I'll say hope, because I don't know for sure if this is the case, but I still hope and believe that there is the ability for us to make independent choices. Now, I also would say that I have a little bit of libertarianism sprinkled in there as well. Maybe it's the rebel in me, but it's, I don't think that it's, you can just drop into one of these 3 because we don't have it figured out 100%. That is the interesting thing about this, is there's no true answer. You can take a hard stance on any of these, but we don't know. We don't know for sure. But we have strong inklings, but we can't be for sure.
Well, first of all, excellent definitions of determinism, libertarianism, and compatibilism. Just to give listeners that maybe aren't familiar, just one more brief synopsis. Determinism, we don't have free will. Libertarianism, we do have free will. Compatibilism assumes both. we'll get there in a second. I thought you did a great job of explaining that. But if we're going down that line of thought, you had given some examples like determinism being, we don't have meaningful free will, Elohim telling us to climb the tower, compatibilism, choosing to defy him. I came prepared with a bit of a thought experiment.
Nice.
And it's here that I want to, I'm sorry. I don't mean to be giving you all these
No, I like it.
homework problems.
I'm into it.
I wanted to shout out a couple of sources that I consulted and sent over to you, Alex, and you had mentioned that you really liked them too. One of my favorite podcasts, I talk about a few of my favorite shows all the time, like Resident Arc, Retrograde and just stuff like that. But Philosophize This is one of my favorite podcasts ever, and it's a philosophy podcast. He has Stephen West is his name. He has a ton of episodes on consciousness and free will. 2 YouTube channels, Alex O'Connor and Unsolicited Advice. That fellow's name is Joe. They have great stuff on this, and a very fiery and passionate debate with emotions running high on free will between Sam Harris and Daniel Dennett. But I will have all of this in the show notes. I definitely encourage you to check this out. This stuff is endlessly fascinating to me. But you had said, Alex, that you feel that you're a compatibilist or closer to libertarianism. You do not think that humans don't have free will. I would like to step in and say that at least as of right now, November 2024, I think I'm a determinist, and I think I side with no free will.
Interesting.
Now, folks listening, if you're somebody that's never thought about philosophy before, when we say we don't have free will, I think there are 2 things people think. They either go down the religious side and think like, God has a plan for everybody. That's not what we're talking about. This is purely secular. You can believe in religion and be any one of these. So this is not religious right now. But then they also think like, everything happens for a reason. Nothing we do matters. And that's not quite it either. Here's the deal. Compatibilism. Let's talk about that for a second. Thomas Hobbes. We talked about him in The Last of Us. We talked about him in Spec Ops: The Line. He was an early compatibilist, and he says this. He says, quote, "A free man is he that, in those things, which by his strength and wit he is able to do, is not hindered," I wrote 100, is not hindered to do what he has a will to do. In other words, as long as you are choosing what you want to do and nobody is forcing you, you are free. I am choosing to eat a hot dog instead of a hamburger. Nobody is forcing me to. Nobody is holding me at gunpoint. Therefore, I am free, right? Now, Arthur Schopenhauer comes in. Schopenhauer was a notorious philosopher that came a little bit before Nietzsche. He's famous for his cynical view on life being not worth living. Schopenhauer says this: "You can do what you want, this is true, but you can't change what you want." And here comes the thought experiment. So, Alex, do you prefer vanilla ice cream or chocolate ice cream?
Oh, man, that is vanilla.
This is the most important
vanilla.
question. Oh, okay. It's the most important question on this podcast ever. I actually agree with you. I'm a vanilla guy myself.
Right on. It's a heated debate that I had with my wife. Specifically, Wendy's Frosties. I'm a vanilla guy, and she thinks I am insane.
When people say vanilla is plain, I disagree. Vanilla is a flavor.
Yeah, no, I'm with you, bud.
But okay, so we both like vanilla ice cream. Now, if we were given a bowl of chocolate, a bowl of vanilla, we're not starving, so we can freely choose which we would like to have. You and I would probably pick vanilla because that's what we prefer, right? So case closed. We have free will because we could choose. But what Schopenhauer is saying is that yes, you can choose to eat the vanilla ice cream, but can you choose to want the vanilla ice cream? I'll phrase this another way. If I asked you to choose to want the chocolate ice cream, could you do it? Now, this is different than saying just choose to eat the chocolate ice cream, because of course we could choose to eat it, but can you fundamentally choose to prefer it?
Yeah, that's tricky. I don't know. I think no, you'd have to train yourself. But no, I don't have a great answer for that one.
I'm so jazzed that you said you'd have to train yourself. Okay, so let's say that you trained yourself. You go through intensive training. you associate vanilla with all these terrible things, and now suddenly you come to prefer chocolate.
Sure.
Were you truly free in that? Because in doing that, your want to prefer chocolate outweighed your preference of vanilla. So now a new want is now coming in, and now I ask you, can you choose to want or not want that? So we get into this big endless loop of, okay, I can choose chocolate, but I'm only choosing it because my want to choose it and to prove this stupid thought experiment wrong is higher than my want for vanilla. But I didn't actually choose to want it. I just do. And we get into this loop. And here is what Schopenhauer is saying. And honestly, as of right now in 2024, this is where I'm falling. If you cannot choose what you want, if our favorite color or favorite flavor of ice cream is just what we prefer, what we want, are we really free? If we can't choose what we want, are we truly free? The answer to that is on the table, because there is no answer.
I know, right?
But ultimately this is a bit reductive, but it comes down to semantics a little bit, because a compatibilist assumes that determinism is true. It assumes that, because determinism states that if we had full knowledge, 100% knowledge of the universe, complete knowledge, then we could predict everything that would happen because we have 100% information. And, we know what we're going to do because we are millions of years of evolution, hardwiring, and we could predict that across the universe. That's what determinism says. Or if it's not predictable that way, then it is truly, genuinely random, which, no matter what, randomness will occur. So, who cares? Compatibilism assumes that, yes, determinism is true, but still being able to willingly choose chocolate or vanilla, choose whether to record a podcast, choose not to hang up on Rick while he's going off and talking at 75% of full knowledge on something. A compatibilist would say that is free will. It comes down to kind of like semantics. If we were to reduce this to a cartoon, it would just be two people arguing because they can't agree on what the definition of is. You know what I mean? Bill Clinton, he had it right. No, he didn't. That's not. We're not saying anything political. I just thought that was funny. But do you know what I mean? I'm sorry. I'm kind of going 100%. Off the rails here a little bit.
No, 100%. I think it's interesting, and as I've been trying to grapple with some of this stuff, if it's kind of tricky. The situation or the examples that you said are going to have influence over some of the outcomes on these thoughts. But I was thinking about compatibilism, and you're correct. Compatibilism, in essence, you have to you have to agree that determinism exists, as part of it, right? So,
right.
If we change the example, and it's not about the vanilla ice cream and the chocolate ice cream, and let's say you grew up in the Pacific Northwest. It's super rainy all the time, right? So it's a really rainy climate. You're going to have a preference for umbrellas, right? Because it's raining, you go outside, you want to stay
True.
dry. So that preference is influenced by the environment and therefore determinism. But when you step out the door, choosing to carry an umbrella or not, what if you can go out there with the umbrella because that's kind of what the environment has set up for you. Okay, but you can still choose, you can decide to go out there and get wet in the rain, right? So that's your choice. So that's so compatibilism, basically, it doesn't deny that external factor. It accepts that the rainy environment is shaping those choices that you're making, but it's still asserting that free will exists because you get to make that choice whether you're going to get wet or not.
Precisely so. And then a determinist would counter, well, yes, you chose to take the umbrella, but it's because you had a want that you couldn't control of
right.
being dry, right? You wanted not to be wet. And then, we go in that circular argument all over again. It's why, that argument, that was a slip. That discussion is what I meant to say between Sam Harris and Daniel Dennett. That's why it's so interesting, is because they're both very intelligent. Sam Harris, I think Sam is more of a psychologist than I hesitate to say he's not taken seriously in philosophy, but he's a psychologist and I don't think people cite him very much. But Daniel Dennett does a lot of work in psychology and philosophy, and Harris is I'm blanking. Oh no, I'm blanking. One of them is a determinist, the other is a compatibilist, and their arguments get very heated because they just go back and forth with these examples and counterexamples, and the reality is like neither of them can be right because this is one of those unknowable truths. It's why this argument wasn't settled in the 1700s, and philosophers have
Right.
it. They're living on easy street now because it's just one of life's questions that will always be debated.
Yeah, I think another interesting example I came across when I was, mulling over some of this stuff, because, I mentioned too that I have sprinkles of the libertarianism in me as well. And a good example that I came across of that is, someone grew up in a strict conservative household or something, and their parents have instilled this strong belief about career path, relationship, life goals, etc. So like based on their upbringing, it would be determined that Sarah would probably grow up to be very similar to her parents. Maybe she might be, Sarah is the person in this example that I was reading about, but maybe she becomes a lawyer, or marries young. It basically adheres to her parents' will, right?
Sure.
But there's a different path, so she could in turn grow up and rebel against that. Even though she has this education, upbringing, societal pressures, she could choose to leave a law school or whatever she's in to travel the world, pursue art, and do something totally opposite of whatever the determinative path has set for her. But that's tricky too, because I would assume that you would counter that like that path pushed her to the brink of wanting, or to deciding to do something different. So it becomes it becomes cyclical again. But it's interesting. It's been very like cool to kind of jump into these different sets or the different camps. But truly, they're camps that all are trying to explain this idea of free will and existence. But we don't truly have the answer for it now, and maybe ever.
Exactly so. I mean, again, if we had the answer, it would have likely been discovered by now. And I don't want to make up a straw man person, but there might be somebody out there that's thinking, okay, if this is circular and cyclical, who cares? Why can't we just drop it? And, why can't we just focus on things that matter, that we can prove? Let's say somebody doesn't care about free will, but consciousness, they're like, well, let's solve that. Free will isn't solvable. Okay. I don't feel like I maybe represented them as well as I could have, but one, I think, I don't mean to be like mean about it, but I think that just demonstrates a fundamental lack of curiosity. But two, this idea of free will, again, I mentioned kind of a poor example of ethical questions with regard to consciousness. If free will, if we ever discover what makes free will, there are ethical concerns that can come out of that too. And, suddenly people can be tested for free will. And more importantly, some people can be judged to have less free will than others. And, maybe the government gets involved. There's all this crazy stuff that could happen. But even more than that, though, it helps us learn and explore and appreciate what it means to be human on this planet. We are blessed with, and I don't mean blessed as in religiously, but we are bestowed this great honor of phenomenal consciousness, of qualia, and I don't know how one could not be curious about that, to think about this. And I understand that sometimes it can come off as like sniffing your own farts in a circle about like stuff that doesn't matter, but I don't know how to not be curious about this stuff. It's so part of what makes us different from cats and dogs and plants and trees. And years of qualia and years of phenomenal consciousness have led to us being on a Discord call together, to you seeing QR codes written by Bud Dink miles across the country. And it's like, I don't know how to explain to you why that's exciting, but it is, No,
totally. I love that you brought this back, came back to this too, because I think it's really interesting, especially in relation to this game, right? So this game is kind of teasing these ideas and getting you to think about these things. And then in turn, like you shared some really cool stuff that, podcasts and whatnot for me to listen to that got me thinking even more about these. And then I think it was some of that supplementary material that you shared. One of the fellas brought up So we have the tendency as humans to inflict our experience onto this idea of free will and existence. So what I think earlier you brought up like the frogs in the tree, etc. But I think it's really interesting because we want to believe that, our experience is kind of seen the same way throughout different conscious beings or whatever. An example that I'll give is of my dog Murphy, R.I.P. But when Murphy was with us, like I'm a dog guy. Not that that matters too much, but there's a line of thought out there, and what am I trying to get at here? So I guess what I'm trying to say is I'm trying to inflict my human experience and my ideas of free will onto my dog, right? Mm-hmm. And there's a set of belief that's impossible for a dog or anything outside of humanity, which I think is a kind of maybe a selfish understanding of all this. But that's my personal stance, my personal belief, anyways. But the science behind this, or this, the other thought would be that Murphy doesn't actually give a fuck about me, as Alex, and he just really wants to get his next meal, right? So he doesn't actually show me affection or show all these things. Like, these are just human emotions that I'm inflicting upon my dog to understand his existence, right? And he's really just doing these things or repeating these behaviors so he can get his next meal. I don't totally agree with that, but I understand it. You know what I'm saying?
I do. A counterexample to this, I think of my mom has a couple of cats, and when they, you used your example of dear old Murph as wanting food, and that's the driver, right? Mm-hmm. We could also use something that's not positive, right? Like my mom, when her cats, I don't know, like when they get sick and they throw up on the carpet, or when they quote unquote disobey the rules and jump on the table, she'll get upset with them and say stuff like, oh, they're doing it because they know it's wrong, or they're doing it to be spiteful because they're mad. And it's like we are inflicting our human consciousness and ideas of free will onto these animals, and it's like, should we be?
Right. And that's the interesting thing. I think that parallel is what the game's trying to make with us. It's trying to get you to decide, or at least think about, like, is it possible for this android to become human through its experience? And then that, you bring that outside, and you bring that in outside the video game realm, and then you start thinking about it. Okay, like, we do have as humans this unique experience within the world or whatever. But when it comes to consciousness, like, where does that end? And I think you teased us a little bit with the, we brought up our pets or whatever, but the thing is like, we're not, I guess I'm not entirely sure where it ends, but I would like to believe that it extends to just beyond us as human beings. But then you enter this question of, well, what is it exactly to be human, which I can only come up with free will. But it's all very messy, But it's interesting.
It gets even. Sorry.
Oh no, just I know I'm like all over the place with this point, but like there was another great example that was brought up in one of the podcasts that you shared with me about, we are going to extend this idea of free will, I guess, onto to our pets, to our animals or whatever. Or let's take it away. So it's the opposite of kind of what I was just saying, and that doesn't exist, and it's only human existence that has this idea of existence, I suppose, and free will, etc. So what's then to stop us from having cockfights, or like, monkey battles, or, you can change that example to like why, some people decide that it's okay to eat fish, but you can't eat chicken. How is the fish like, but the fish doesn't have feelings, and I don't know, man, it just gets so like hairy, and it's like, but it's like, how far are we really willing to push this idea of existence past our own existence, when we can barely even explain what existence is in our own personal experience?
Yeah, precisely so. Or to use a more provocative example, like rather than fish versus chicken, what separates a cat from fish and chicken,
Right.
you know, or a horse. You know, these are meats that we don't eat in the West. I know horse is popular in Japan, and I've heard it's extremely good. I would be very interested. But, you know, I don't want to eat a cat. You know, I can't give you a good reason. I mean, do I think a cat is fundamentally different than a chicken? I mean, I could maybe say yes, but I couldn't tell you why. I just feel that way, you know? So it's these conversations, I mean, you're exactly right, man. They open up into ethics very, very well. It's like, I couldn't tell you why I, you know, think cats are different than chicken. I just know that I would never eat a cat. And I wouldn't, folks. I mean, I have a cat. I put my face into her purring fur like daily. I think it makes my soul grow. But which again, like, how do you define a soul? Oh,
Right.
brother, here we go again. You had mentioned that like free will is the determining factor of human consciousness. The only thing that I'd push back on that as being like maybe not is that then you get determinists out here that say we don't have free will.
Right.
Then suddenly it becomes like, well, okay, then how are humans different than animals? You know,
Just a
we know that they are.
man. No.
Yeah. Well, there you go. That's maybe this is all a simulation. You know, there are theories that say like it's most probable that this is a simulation, right?
Right.
Because if it were a simulation, or wait, oh goodness, I don't want to try and misspeak this. I will either edit this in or like, you know, just link it to you privately, Alex. But like people have argued that like if you're going to statistically bet that it is probably more probable. Listen to me. It's more probable that we are in a simulation than not. I mean, if we really wanted to view it from a bird's eye lens. I don't know. I might put that in, I might edit it in, or I might just send that to you privately if I find it and we could talk on our own.
Right on.
What I was thinking of here is the simulation hypothesis, which was originally put forward by Nick Bostrom in 2003. But philosophers have been thinking about this kind of thing since antiquity. I mean, as far back as Plato's allegory of the cave, we see ideas of perception and reality not being what they seem. But for Nick Bostrom, in his 2003 argument, he states this. He comes up with a trilemma that says one of these three things must be true. Either civilizations go extinct or otherwise destroy themselves before obtaining the means and abilities to create simulated reality. 2, they have the ability, they have the means, these civilizations, and they simply lose interest. They have better things to do with their computing powers. Or 3, they obtain these and multitudes, cornucopias of simulated realities, both past and present, end up existing. And in these cases, it is most probable that we are living in a simulation. If this sect of the trilemma is true, it's analogous to putting 99 red marbles into a bag and one green and pulling one out at random. It's most likely that you're going to be a red marble. Now, of course, it's not the probability of 99 out of 100. It's much more likely than that. And he calculates all of this much more in depth than I am in any way equipped to explain. He uses something called Bayesian statistics that is just absolutely fascinating. I highly recommend checking it out. It's an interesting rabbit hole to go down. It's above my pay grade, and I'm not smart enough to educate everybody on it. But that was the gist of it. Check out the link in the description. It'll give you a primer as well as some words from Bostrom himself. Okay, back to the show. And I apologize for apologizing so much. I get a little self-conscious about recording episodes like this that I think might not be for everybody. But like, I find this stuff terribly interesting. I know you do too. It's why we've had a great conversation about it. But, you know, it circles us back around to consciousness once again. Like, how do we define consciousness? Well, we don't really know. It's the hard problem of consciousness that David Chalmers famously came into, or famously coined, whatever. It's something we all know that we are conscious, or most of us think that, but we just don't know how. To tie it back to the Talos principle, and I know there's so much that we didn't talk about, like Elohim and Milton as characters. Well, actually, maybe, do you know what? Maybe we should back up just a little bit and talk about them before we end the episode. Do you think that might be a good idea?
Sure. Let's do it up.
Elohim is a very clear analog to the Judeo-Christian God. There are explicit references to Christianity, such as this one here.
In the beginning were the words, and the words made the world. I am the words are everything. Where the words end, the world ends. You cannot go forward in an absence of space. Repeat.
Which is pretty similar to the Gospel of John, that says, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God, etc. Milton plays the role of the serpent, of Lucifer, closer to like Lucifer in Milton's Paradise Lost, who, there you go, he's probably named after Milton. Have you read Paradise Lost?
I have not.
Me neither. I have it. I was gonna try and read it for this, but it's a little long, so I decided not to. But my understanding is that they paint Lucifer in a more complex personality than just like the bad deceiver that a lot of strict Christian texts will paint him as. Just a more complex character, which is interesting to me. But Milton comes to find, Milton has all of human knowledge. That's what the IAN, the Nomadics Institute, uploaded everything into there. Milton has access to all of that and sees all of the contradictions in humanity and decides that, there's no clear answer. Everybody is fighting about stuff. Nobody can agree. And Milton turns to nihilism. Nihilism, the famous last stop for philosophers like Nietzsche, who condemn nihilism, and Camus as well. Camus and Nietzsche had very different views on how to surpass nihilism. But Milton turns to nihilism. You can actually take Milton with you at the end if you transcend and like break out of the simulation. Were you able to do that, or did you leave Milton behind?
Behind.
Ooh, interesting. I brought him along.
And that's another cool thing about this game is it gives you the ability to make a couple different choices.
Yeah, totally. And you could check those out on YouTube if you'd like. That's really the only difference between those two. But there's also Straton of Stagira, which is a fictitious philosopher they made up for this, that gave the philosophy of the Talos principle. So let me read the Talos principle from Straton. That might spawn a couple more comments about consciousness, and then we can wrap it up. Does that sound good to you, Alex?
Sounds good to me, bud.
All right. So Straton of Stagira, fictitious philosopher that is based on actual philosophers, was said to be, they even cover up their tracks by saying that his work was lost in the fire of Alexandria, which is just great. But Straton says this: "It is the grave error of many philosophers, not only of the Athenian schools, but also of many others, that they begin not with observation of the cosmos as it surrounds us, but with a conclusion already in mind." And here I put a parenthetical here. This is like the exact same as Nietzsche's opening in Beyond Good and Evil, where he says that all philosophers have an agenda and biases. It's terrific. But anyway, Straton goes on. "And often that conclusion is that the world was created ideal, and mankind itself the greatest creation of the gods. Yet neither the world nor the gods owe mankind perfection. It is arrogance itself to presume so, and contrary to all the methods of philosophy. The honest philosopher seeks only the truth, even if it bears no comfort. He must begin by assuming, as Socrates did, that he knows nothing." I apologize. That was not the Talos principle. That was just another thing that he wrote. Here is the Talos principle. "Whether it is true that Daedalus constructed the giant Talos, or as others say he was the creation of Hephaestus, what we may be certain of is that he was made of bronze and had but one vein, within which flowed a liquid substance like blood, which some would claim was quicksilver, and others assert was ichor. The loss of that liquid caused him to die as man dies when he loses his blood. May we not then say that Talos, though created as a machine or a toy, had all the essential properties of a man? He moved of his own volition. He spoke and could be spoken to, had wishes and desires. Indeed, in the tale of the Argonauts, that would cause of his downfall. If then a machine may have all the properties of a man and act as a man while driven only by ingenious plan of its construction and the interaction of its materials according to the principles of nature, then does it not follow that man may also be seen as a machine? This contradicts," I love this little tail end, "this contradicts all the schools of metaphysics, yet even the most faithful philosopher cannot live without his blood." It ties it all together. This is given to you at the beginning of a game, but it's prompting you to think, if this machine, and, this is really prevalent now with AI, with the rise of AI. This game has become so prescient in retrospect. But if an AI can think and act of its own volition and speak and mirrors humanity, is it not human?
That is the question.
It is the question, and I suspect that we could talk another like hour and a half, 2 hours about this without running out of stuff to say, Alex. But, like I say all the time, this is the beginning of a discussion, not the end. I would like to do more episodes on the show in the future relating to the Talos Principle 1 or 2. So look forward to that. But for today, particularly because, everybody has a schedule and we've got to get back to other life things. I think today this is where we're going to call it, with one final caveat. If any of this sounds interesting to you folks, please do help us continue the conversation in the Discord. You can find a link to that in the description. And, these questions don't have answers, but they are really fascinating to talk about. I don't feel like I even did half of the justice that should have been done for these conversations, but therein lies the beauty, is that this is an evolving conversation. It's not one that ends and gets a period after it. So please do give us a chance in the Discord. I got to thank you, Alex, for sticking around. I know I kind of talked out of my ass a lot here, but I hope this was as entertaining for you as it was for me.
Oh, you and me both, bud. I don't know what I'm talking about.
It's a total blast.
Yeah. No, it's been great. Thanks again for having me on, Rick. It's always a pleasure. Pixel Project Radio is one of my favorite podcasts, so it's definitely a treat to be able to contribute to it. So thanks again for the invite, my man.
Oh, the pleasure is all mine. I also love Low 5, so I was super jazzed to have you on here. And speaking of Low 5, folks that have listened before know all about Low 5. It's a podcast where you and your brother Luke, a dynamic duo who I've said before have the best on-mic presence of any podcast I listen to, which is kind of cheating because you guys grew up together, but hey, use it to your advantage, I say. You guys go through games from your childhood, sometimes games from today, and you talk about them at length. Episodes like Disco Elysium, Kirby 64, Celeste, if I'm not... Yes, you guys have definitely done Celeste. Yeah. And even some newer games like Daedalus. That was that the modern-day Game Boy game?
Oh yeah, Dedius.
Dedius, that's right.
I think he might have made up that word, but yes, that yep. So we mix it up. So we either throw it back or we'll do something. And sometimes we open it up to our Discord community to kind of make our choices for us, because maybe there is a little bit of a determinist in me. I don't know.
Look at you being cheeky. You guys have also done a ton of other stuff: Donkey Kong Country, Sea of Stars, Grease, Prince of Persia. I highly recommend everybody check out Low 5. They're absolutely fantastic. Not to mention, you guys had like a little mini series of educational stuff for a little while, based on some of the research Luke does. But enough from me. I would love, if you wouldn't mind, Alex, to for you to tell my listeners what you've been up to lately on Low 5, and if you have an episode to recommend for newcomers where they could start and get the best of Luke and Alex. Please, by all means, let us know.
Oh man, you've given me my flowers, Rick. I don't really know what else to say. It's I mean, we have a lot of fun doing it. In the end, we kind of always joke like it's really cool that we have an audience, and like honestly, it's really fun interacting with them. But in the end, like what Luke and I always fall back on is it's just a great excuse for us to play video games and talk about it once a month. And that's another thing. It's a low barrier to entry. Nothing against churning out consistent content. There's a not consistent is not the right word. Weekly content, bi-weekly. I love it and I love consuming it. But for me, I've just got stuff going on where I'm unable to do that at the moment. So we do a monthly. That's always been kind of our format, and that's been kind of it lowers that bar of entry for a lot of folks. Like they don't have to be too worried about keeping up with us. Which is another reason to come in and check us out. And as far as like which one, what episode, like they're all fun. I would just take a look. Our main episodes will discuss one game that we played that month and kind of our experience behind it. So just kind of go through and see what game that you might relate to, either whether it's you're interested in it. We try and stray away from any major spoilers, and if we do have spoilers, we'll throw up a wall. But just go through and pick a game that maybe you have interest in, and then have a listen. Also, have had the great pleasure of interviewing a couple devs. You mentioned Dedius. I'm a really big handheld and Game Boy fan, and I've had the opportunity to jump into some of these homebrews that have been coming out in the past few years for the Game Boy. I think it's really fun. We actually had a great talk a while back on Pixel Project Radio about the Game Boy, a little bit of a retrospect. But I think in there I mentioned, clearly I love the Game Boy, but I think it's so cool that people are still making games for it today in 2024. And I had the great pleasure of interviewing Isma, who is the developer of Dedius, which is a Game Boy game that came out in 2019, I want to say. And then also Marco, the developer of a game called Pine Creek, which is another Game Boy joint that was put out around the same time, 2020-ish. But really cool just to connect with them. I really admire their work, and they both had great things to say, and those are fun conversations. So then, if I'm hawking lo-fi, I'm gonna have people check those interviews out as well, because those are a lot of fun for me.
I absolutely recommend folks do. It is so much fun. You guys are doing some really interesting stuff. Even those interviews are. I don't know another podcast that's doing anything similar. It's very cool. It's very cool to see new Game Boy games being made. That's just phenomenal. And I'm really appreciative of you guys doing that stuff. Not to mention of your standard episodes too. Your Sea of Stars and Disco Elysiums and whatnot. It's really terrific. And I'm going to link to Lo5 in the episode description. So you folks can check them out on Discord and hang out there. You can check them out wherever you get your podcasts, and I hope you do, because it's a terrific show. You can also, in the episode description, find some of the sources that Alex and I talked about today, as well as links to our socials, Discord, the Patreon if you'd like, Instagram, Blue Sky, which has been popping off lately, man. So many new Blue Sky folks, because Twitter is we all know what's going on. You can find all of that there. It's a lot of fun. And with that, I just got to say thank you again, Alex, and and everybody, Alex included, and listeners, let's continue this conversation. This is a lot of fun.
Yeah, and I'm just going to go out there and say, if you made it this far in the episode, you probably are craving a little bit more Rick, and you should sign up for his Patreon, because that's good shit.
Oh, jeez. Yes, where I, what's that one episode I narrated a Garfield comic, like panel by panel.
Oh, man.
That's so silly.
In truth, man, there's my kid he's a little over 1 now, but your Patreon was great when he wouldn't go to sleep at night, and I'd sit there and bounce and listen to some of your Patreon episodes, and it put me in a great mood, dude. So you didn't even know you were hanging with me at that time, but you were.
I'm gonna get emotional. Thank you. Okay, I'm going to go exercise my free will by hitting the stop button and maybe do some not so free will stuff and get back to my job. Just kidding. Or am I? Who knows? Thank you for listening, everybody. My name is Rick Firestone. As always, we'll catch you again next time. Take care.